I want to talk about culture. What I think is going on with culture. Well, first of all, I would say one thing always to do is break the misconceptions. I will say I want to break some misconceptions that I think are widely out there. One misconception is the idea that things are getting liberaler and liberaler, and that the further back in time you go, the more conservative people were. That just doesn't hold. That could hold for a couple decades at best. Then it starts to get a little bit dicey. It's been up and down enough. And if you go back far enough, and people really were super conservative, it didn't include what you think, like they weren't bigoted against homosexuals and things like this, which are somewhat modern in terms of being conservative bigotries. Even though, as bigotries themselves, of course, they've been out there a long time. But I think that the defining characteristic of mankind is we awake really just a couple thousand years of our evolution, where we can reflect back that long with having thousands of years of writing. I think you see a species here that's dealing with really one core problem, and that's slavery. War, the rest, genocide, these all come from the problem of slavery. Because in its essence, the problem of slavery is wanting to oppress other people. The problem of slavery is that people think it's good for the master. That's the problem with slavery. Everybody knows it's bad for the slave. I don't care the people that try to deny that. Whatever. The problem is people think it's good for the master. It's not good for the master to be the master. It's a really bad idea. And not realizing why it's a bad idea is caricature here. That's the epitome of why we are locked in an era of slavery. But I do believe we're coming out of it. We have invented an idea of freedom that the slave can take as their own and become free inside, and then fight for their freedom against oppression. Because the world is still very much defined by oppression and kinds of slavery which are sort of compromises, where the slave isn't freed, but is given a much better situation in which to operate. Like, what if you had a slave economy? Every place is slave. You couldn't get a job unless it says a slave. You sign yourself over, and you do it. You try to find someone you can trust, but it's always a little bit slavery. Then suddenly there's a reform, and instead of having to stay on that work camp where where your job is, you're allowed to go anywhere. You can go back and forth. You can even be given, chits that you can use as money at other places and buy goods from these other businesses. And you can travel freely, which means you can try out other places and see if anybody over there wants to hire you, and you can switch who you're slave to. Would you still be a slave? That question stops being very important, because it doesn't matter if you would still be a slave, what the definition of slave is. The fact is that as a system, you wouldn't have gotten rid of slavery. I think this is where we are in our history, and I think it's inevitable that we'll overcome slavery. I don't think the human race will blow itself up. I don't think it actually has the firepower or ability to do that. I do think there is a big difference. I think politically, if we have the right politics for the next 100 years, then maybe in 100 years we'll have some freedom finally. Real freedom. On the other hand, and by we I mean the world, I'm doing okay. And on the other hand, it could be 1,000 years. So I think there's a big difference, because I think it makes a difference if there's 900 extra years of oppression. On the other hand, I do believe that it's being taken care of, not on its own, through us, but it is going to happen. And that's my idea of where the culture is right now. And politics, I will say, is just a symptom of where we are so far. It is not how things are changing.